Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be talking about family dynamics, specifically dysfunctional families. And we're basing this exploration on an article called 13 Signs Your Family is Dysfunctional and How to Improve Your Family Dynamic from Parents Magazine, published on January 27th, 2025.
Right.
So it's interesting.
It term that gets thrown around a lot, dysfunctional.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to note that dysfunctional doesn't mean that a family is broken or beyond repair. It just points to patterns of behavior and interaction that create challenges and potentially impact the well-being of family members.
So it's more about understanding those patterns and their effects.
Exactly.
Right. Not about labeling families as good or bad.
Precisely. Think of it as a spectrum.
Okay.
All families have their quirks and challenges and idiosyncrasies. But when certain behaviors become persistent and pervasive, they can create a dysfunctional dynamic.
Okay, so the article actually dives into 13 signs of dysfunction. And I have to say, some of them are surprisingly subtle.
Yeah.
Like one that stood out to me was parentification.
Parentification is a really interesting concept.
Yeah.
And it's essentially when children are forced into adult roles, often taking on responsibilities that should belong to the parents.
Okay, so the article mentions that this happens a lot in families dealing with substance abuse.
Right.
But can you give me an example of what that might look like in a day-to-day scenario?
Sure. So imagine a teenager who's constantly mediating arguments between their parents, or a child who's responsible for cooking meals and caring for younger siblings because a parent is struggling with addiction.
Wow.
These are classic examples of parentification.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a lot for a child to handle. Another sign that the article mentioned was bargaining and lack of rules.
Yes. This can be a tricky one.
Yeah.
Because it might seem harmless on the surface. A parent might negotiate with a child who's throwing a tantrum, giving in to their demands, just to restore peace.
I mean, isn't that just part of being a parent, though? Like, don't we all have to negotiate with our kids sometimes?
Of course, there's a difference between occasional compromise and consistently rewarding bad behavior.
Okay.
When parents constantly bargain or fail to set clear boundaries, it creates an environment where children learn that they can manipulate the situation to get what they want.
So it's about consistency and creating a sense of structure.
Right.
The article also makes a distinction between dysfunctional and toxic families.
Yes.
Can you explain the difference?
The terms are often used interchangeably, but there's a key distinction.
Okay.
All toxic families are dysfunctional, but not all dysfunctional families are toxic. Toxicity implies a level of intentional harm and control.
Okay.
It's about behaviors that consistently damage the emotional and psychological well-being of family members.
So while a dysfunctional family might struggle with communication or setting boundaries, a toxic family would actively engage in behaviors like manipulation, verbal abuse, or constant criticism.
Exactly. And that distinction is important because it helps us understand the severity of the situation and the potential impact on individuals within the family.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So we've talked about what dysfunction is and how to spot it. Now I'm really curious to understand the impact of growing up in a dysfunctional family.
Right.
What kind of long-term effects are we talking about?
Well, the article delves into some pretty concerning consequences.
Okay.
Children raised in dysfunctional families often struggle with emotional regulation.
Oh.
They may have difficulty managing their anger, sadness, or anxiety because they haven't had healthy role models to learn from.
So if you've never seen a parent calmly handle a stressful situation, you might not have the tools to do it yourself.
That's a great way to put it. And these difficulties with emotional regulation can lead to a cascade of problems later in life. The article mentions increased risks of anxiety, depression, even substance abuse. It's like this ripple effect that impacts various aspects of a person's life.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if some behavioral issues in children might actually be stemming from underlying emotional pain.
Absolutely. Dr. Biller, a child psychologist quoted in the article, points out that dysfunction can even manifest as trauma symptoms, mimicking conditions like ADHD or ODD.
Oh, wow.
So it's crucial to consider the family context when addressing behavioral issues in children.
This is all starting to feel a bit heavy. Is there any hope for families struggling with these issues?
That's a really important question. And the article offers a glimmer of hope.
Okay.
Dr. Biller emphasizes that families are not destined to be broken. When dysfunction is recognized and addressed, significant healing can occur. It's not a life sentence. Change is possible.
That's reassuring to hear. But how do families even begin to tackle these deeply ingrained patterns?
The article offers some practical advice, and it all starts with acknowledging the dysfunction and each member's role in it. From there, seeking professional help through therapy or counseling can be crucial.
Okay, it's like having a guide to help you navigate this complex terrain, right?
Exactly. Someone who can provide tools and strategies for communication, boundary setting, and conflict resolution.
And while therapy is a valuable resource, the article also stresses the importance of day-to-day changes that can promote healthier family dynamics.
Right. Things like prioritizing mental health, modeling healthy coping mechanisms, and encouraging open communication.
So I'm guessing those seemingly small changes can actually make a big difference over time.
Absolutely. It's about shifting the entire family culture, one interaction at a time.
Okay.
And one area that often requires attention is setting boundaries with extended family.
Ooh, this can be tricky, especially if those relationships are fraught with dysfunction. Holidays and family gatherings can become real minefields.
You're right. But setting boundaries isn't about cutting people off entirely. It's about defining what you will and will not tolerate and communicating those boundaries clearly and assertively.
It sounds like a delicate balance. On the one hand, you want to protect your family's emotional well-being. On the other, you might not want to completely sever ties.
Right, with extended family.
And remember, you're not just setting boundaries for yourself, you're also modeling healthy behavior for your children.
That's right. You're showing them that it's okay to stand up for themselves and prioritize their own emotional safety, even within the family unit.
That's a powerful message. It's about empowering them to create healthier relationships in their own lives.
Exactly.
So we've talked about acknowledging dysfunction, seeking professional help, and setting boundaries. What other practical advice does the article offer?
Well, it highlights the importance of creating a plan for dealing with conflict.
Okay.
Dysfunctional families often thrive on chaos and unpredictability. So having a predetermined strategy can help you navigate those stormy waters more effectively.
So that might mean knowing when to disengage from a conversation, having an exit strategy for a family gathering that's going south, or even role-playing difficult conversations beforehand to equip your children with the skills they need to handle tricky situations.
Precisely. It's about giving them a toolkit for emotional self-defense.
Wow.
Empowering them to handle challenging interactions without getting sucked into those familiar patterns of dysfunction. And, even with a plan, conflict can still be incredibly stressful.
Yeah.
Especially for children who've grown up in dysfunctional environments.
It's like they've missed out on that crucial emotional regulation training, right?
Yeah.
So how do we help them develop those skills?
That's where Dr. Erin O'Callaghan, and another psychologist quoted in the article, offers some valuable insights.
Okay.
She stresses the importance of teaching children specific techniques for managing their emotions.
So what kind of techniques are we talking about?
Things like deep breathing exercises,
mindfulness
practices, or even simple distraction techniques. It's about giving them a set of tools they can use to calm themselves down when those big feelings start to bubble up.
It's almost like a first aid kit for their emotions. Okay.
And these skills are crucial not only for navigating conflict, but for building resilience in general.
Okay.
Dr. O'Callaghan also talks about encouraging a sense of autonomy in children, which can be especially challenging in dysfunctional families, where control and manipulation often run rampant.
That makes sense. If you grow up in an environment where your needs and feelings are constantly dismissed, it can be hard to develop a strong sense of self.
Exactly. So Dr. O'Callaghan emphasizes the importance of supporting children's interests, building their self-esteem, and empowering them to say no when necessary. It's about helping them develop a strong sense of self and the confidence to advocate for their own well-being, even in the face of pressure from family members.
That's so important, especially when it comes to setting boundaries, particularly with extended family. We touched on this earlier.
Right.
But I'm wondering how you actually go about setting boundaries with a manipulative family member. It sounds incredibly difficult.
It definitely can be.
Yeah.
But remember, you're not trying to change their behavior.
Okay.
You're setting limits to protect yourself and your family.
Okay.
Start by clearly identifying what you will and will not tolerate. For example, if a family member constantly criticizes you, you might set a boundary by saying, I'm not willing to engage in conversations that are disrespectful.
Okay, and what if they try to push back or guilt you into giving in?
That's when you have to hold firm. Reiterate your boundary and disengage if necessary.
Yeah.
You might say something like, I understand you're upset, but this is important to me. And remember, setting boundaries is an ongoing process. It's not a one-time conversation.
Right.
You may have to reinforce those boundaries repeatedly, especially with family members who are accustomed to getting their way.
It sounds like a lot of work, but ultimately it's about prioritizing your family's well-being, right?
Absolutely.
It's about creating a sense of safety and respect within your own home, even if it means setting limits with extended family.
Exactly. And it's not just about protecting yourself. It's also about modeling healthy behavior for your children.
Okay.
You're showing them that it's okay to stand up for themselves, to value their own needs and feelings, and to create healthy boundaries in their own relationships.
That's such a powerful message. But what about those situations where conflict is unavoidable? How do you navigate those moments, especially when dealing with family members who might be prone to drama or escalation?
The article offers some really helpful tips for managing those situations.
Okay.
One key strategy is to stay calm and avoid getting sucked into the emotional whirlwind.
Okay.
Remember, you can't control other people's behavior, but you can control your own reactions.
So it's about taking a deep breath.
Yeah.
And choosing not to engage in the same old patterns.
Exactly. Of arguing and reactivity. And it can be helpful to have an exit strategy in place. If a situation becomes too heated, know when to walk away. You might say something like, I need a break from this conversation right now, and then remove yourself from the situation.
It sounds like it takes a lot of self-awareness and discipline to do that.
It does,
Yeah.
especially in the heat of the moment. But remember, you're not giving in or admitting defeat by walking away.
Okay.
You're simply choosing to protect yourself and your family from a toxic situation. And you're also sending a clear message that you're not willing to play by the old dysfunctional rules anymore. You're choosing a different path.
And speaking of choosing a different path, what about those difficult conversations that are sometimes unavoidable? How can we prepare ourselves and our children for those moments?
Role-playing can be incredibly helpful.
Okay.
The article suggests practicing these interactions beforehand, equipping your children with the words and strategies they need to handle tricky conversations.
So you might sit down with your child and say, imagine your aunt starts criticizing your outfit again. How could you respond in a way that sets a boundary while still being respectful?
Exactly. And it's not just about giving them words to say. It's about helping them develop the confidence and assertiveness to use those words effectively. It's like giving them a script for how to handle those challenging moments so they don't feel caught off guard or overwhelmed.
It seems like all of these strategies are ultimately about breaking free from those ingrained patterns of dysfunction.
Absolutely. And creating a new, healthier dynamic.
And that brings us to a really interesting point that the article touches on, the idea that recognizing dysfunction is only the first step.
Right.
The real work begins when we start to understand how those patterns might still be influencing us today, even as adults.
That's such a crucial point. It's like shining a light on those subtle ways that past experiences might be shaping our current behaviors and relationships.
So, for example, if you grew up in a family where expressing emotions was discouraged, you might find yourself struggling to communicate your feelings in your adult relationships. Or if your parents were constantly critical, you might be overly sensitive to feedback from your boss or partner.
Right.
And the article suggests that therapy can be an invaluable tool for exploring these patterns and understanding how they might be impacting our lives.
It's like having a guide to help you unpack that baggage.
Precisely. And figure out what to keep and what to let go of.
And it's not just about unpacking the negative stuff. Therapy can also help us identify the strengths and resilience we developed as a result of navigating those challenging family dynamics.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that those experiences, while difficult, also shaped us in ways that might be beneficial.
So it's about finding that balance between acknowledging the impact of the past without letting it define our present or future. Exactly. And it's about recognizing that healing is an ongoing journey, not a destination. There will be ups and downs, moments of clarity and moments of confusion, but with support and self-awareness, we can continue to evolve and create healthier, more fulfilling relationships for ourselves and future generations.
It feels like we're talking about like rewiring our brains almost.
In a way, yeah. It's about recognizing those ingrained patterns. And consciously choosing to respond differently.
Yeah, and the article emphasizes that self-care plays a crucial role in this process. It might seem selfish at first glance, but prioritizing your own well-being is essential when navigating the complexities of family dysfunction.
It's like the classic oxygen mask analogy. You can't help others if you're gasping for air yourself.
Right.
Self-care isn't about being indulgent.
Yeah.
It's about creating the space and energy you need
Yeah.
to show up as your best self.
Yeah.
Both for yourself and for your family.
So it's not just about bubble baths and spa days, although those can be lovely.
Exactly. It's about making conscious choices
Well, yeah.
that nourish your mental, emotional,
Yeah.
and physical health. It might be setting aside time for meditation, going for a walk in nature, or simply saying no to commitments that drain you.
And it sounds like this also applies to our children. We need to teach them the importance of self-care.
Absolutely. Of listening to their bodies and their emotions, and of prioritizing their own well-being.
We often talk about teaching children resilience, but resilience isn't about pushing through exhaustion.
Right. Or ignoring your needs. It's about having the tools and the permission to take care of yourself, even in the midst of chaos.
So it's about modeling those behaviors ourselves and creating a family culture where self-care is valued and prioritized.
Precisely. And as we wrap up this deep dive into dysfunctional family dynamics, I think it's important to leave our listeners with a question to ponder.
Ooh, I like that. Something to spark further reflection and maybe even inspire some action.
Exactly. Knowing these signs of dysfunction and the potential impact they can have, what subtle ways might past family dynamics still be influencing your behavior or relationships today? It's a question worth exploring, perhaps even with a therapist or a trusted friend. Because the more we understand those patterns, the more power we have to break free from them and create healthier, more fulfilling lives for ourselves and future generations.
That's a powerful thought to end on. And that wraps up our deep dive for today. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep those brains buzzing.
Yeah.